Hi, thank you so much for that really nice introduction and also for thinking of me for doing this new program. And, I think it's particularly poignant that a lot of my work has to do with technology and trying to make connections between people, and while technology itself is trying to capture us, and how we can sort of like find new ways of um, reflecting on this sort of modern condition of like digital life. The core really of like my practice is to really interrogate the notions of control and freedom, which also plays out through performance. And that term of performance is really wide, from like actual, performative action versus like how we ourselves are living in the world, like what roles do we play. um, so this often, like in my work, in my research, is manifest in investigating the built environment around us. So that could encompass physical aspects, like architectural and design based um, things, to also the invisible architecture around us, the invisible infrastructure, which is digital technology. And that now is something that is not only an external force, but now becoming increasingly more internalized. So if you think of like work itself and what that might mean, like when we're on our phones all the time, and now we're at home, supposedly working or doing what we are trying to do on a daily basis. Directly behind me is an ongoing series of painting type objects, which are part of a series called the Art de Mobilement. And essentially they are spray, paint mist, pigment mist, encapsulated inside of these thermoform plexi shells, plastic clear acrylic shells. And this series kind of came out of my really researching deeply the history of paint pigment, and also how paintings themselves are sort of instrumentalized in architecture. So I can kind of try to show you like how they are like essentially a clear box, and then they are sprayed.
Part of them is a very transparency.
Yes, there's usually some transparency. They're transparent when they start, and then I paint them in reverse using spray enamel pigment. And it's often in this kind of gradient, so that it's really not the color sort of like changing throughout its surface. Each of these has a subtitle of a geographic location, and that would be all of these are named after deserted islands. So there's this notion of like that these are just pure abstraction of color and gradients of color that, like, it's constantly sort of changing throughout that. But once it's attached to some kind of geographic location, which would be a desert island, there's an image that's like conjured in your mind. And it connects it to this place that one can never go to, or one can never reach, sort of out of touch itself, but it only can exist sort of like in your imagination. Also something I've been working on for over, 10 years. But it's this acoustic, I call these acoustic portraits, and they're essentially woven textiles of audio recordings of different types of production sites. And so this series kind of started with recording industrial type of locations, industrial factories such as weaving mills, dyeing factories, things like that related to textile industry or like the old manufacturing industry. And then on the other hand, recording new technology kind of factories like data centers. This piece is a audio recording of a biotechnology company that that essentially is creating internal body prosthetics and medical devices. So they're having these sort of like two dual type of ideas around production that's still somehow like rooted in materiality, even though a lot of it is now, as we're like living in this world of like constant sort of dematerialization, there's some still notion that comes back to something physical or bodily. And so that's sort of like where I am right now, thinking about the next bodies of work from the negative entropy series to some of the newer work which I'm working on. There's some test pieces here on the table, which are some new sculptures. It's kind of hard to see. Let me see. This is a new series called Anima, and they're blown glass works that eventually will have these kind of jacuzzi gold jet nozzles puncturing the surface of these. But I wanted to make, since I'm thinking of things that are, you know, using ephemeral or invisible things that are around us, like sound, which are those pieces, to like paint mist, which is essentially, you know, using air itself and captured in a box. I wanted to use like the human breath as something to make the form, the shape of something. So this is sort of like the first study of these.
So these are mouth-blown glass pieces, right?
Mouth-blown glass, yeah, exactly. And the forms are sort of referencing, let me just put this computer down so I can show you better. The forms are referencing sort of like orthotic devices, or like have a kind of organic biomorphic shapes. I started with these sketches of different kind of body braces and like external sort of things that shape the body, conform or contort the body, and then working with the glass blower to try to sort of shape those, make these shapes using his breath. Yeah, and then this is like an impression of like where the sort of air jet nozzle would be placed, different places along the surface, which is like alluding to this notion of like something that's like really puncturing, going through and puncturing the body. So this is a theme that's sort of going throughout the work, where there's some kind of rupture happening, and that it's like coursing through the physical part of us. What's happening now is just sort of amplifying something we're already living with, which is sort of like you know, hyper connectivity, but also a lot of like disconnection, a lot of isolation, and a lot of like trying to not be completely scraped, I guess is like the word in like a technological term. You know, living the way that we have been recently is just a sort of like an extreme example of how like much that we've had to sort of submit to technology and use technology, but also to try to imagine how we can do things with it besides just being subject to it.